This is America, and that, of course, is the Pentagon, where defense decisions are made for US forces right the way around the world. Inside that building right now, they are calculating just how many key missiles they have left since the start of the war in Iran and what they can now afford to do with them. I'll have more on that situation in a few minutes' time. First, though, let's go to our Washington, D.C. studio and Alex Marquardt.
Thank you, Richard. Almost 6 months into Donald Trump's war against Iran, he is facing a stark reality. The U.S. is running desperately low on some of its most critical weapons. The U.S. military has burned through missiles at such an alarming rate that it has reportedly forced Trump to reconsider strikes against Iran and the U.S. military to have to choose which Iranian drones and rockets to shoot down because it simply can't hit them all. Despite a string of reports and analysis all detailing the depletion of some of America's most sophisticated munitions, Trump continues to insist that everything is just fine.
The entire country can be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night.
We have tremendous amounts of ammunition. We have, we're packed. We're in very good shape. We have literally massive amounts of ammunition.
We have a lot of ammunition, different types, but we have a lot. We want to have vast amounts of ammunition, which we have right now. We have a lot of ammunition.
We're ready to go. Look, we're locked and loaded. We're ready to go.
Despite those claims from Trump, the blistering pace at which these weapons are being used means it will take years to replenish the stockpiles. Richard Gaisford looks at what is being used up and what it could mean for America's ability to fight its next war.
It's painstaking work putting together a Patriot air defense missile with demand far outstripping supply. Each of these missiles costs between $4 and $5 million, with delivery taking 2 years from when an order's been placed. The Patriot system's been used since the Gulf War in 1991, with missiles evolving to counter modern threats. Since the US launched its war with Iran, the Center for Strategic International Studies says up to 2/3 of pre-war stocks of Patriots have been used. It's a similar situation when it comes to terminal high air defense missiles known as THAADs. They're the only real alternative to the Patriot when it comes to targeting Iran's ballistic missiles. Now, each one of these, well, they cost around $15 million, and orders take years to complete. Analysts warn pre-war stockpiles have now been halved. The president's been keen to play down fears of shortages, but hasn't entirely denied them.
And we're using munitions that are very powerful, very good, but we wouldn't have been using them. We could have used something else. But these are a little bit older type, equally as effective. And it's things that we have so much. Plus, we have supplies of munitions all over the world that if we ever needed them, we'd take that.
The US has certainly been moving missile systems around the globe. Between March and October last year, the US Army had already redeployed 2 Patriot systems and around 500 personnel from South Korea to the Middle East. Between March and April this year, 6 THAAD launchers from US forces in South Korea were sent to support the Middle East campaign against Iran. In June, the 6 THAAD launchers returned to their bases after the intensive phase of Operation Epic Fury wound down. But the supply had been depleted, with a lack of cover for months in Southeast Asia. That poses the question whether China's also watching America's dwindling stockpile of crucial missiles, weighing up whether a military takeover of Taiwan is more of a possibility.
We always want more. We have to have more. We have other things maybe come up. Maybe come up and maybe don't come up. Hopefully nothing else does come up. But we're in very good shape. We have literally massive amounts of ammunition.
American forces certainly need more long-range attack missiles. In the first month of its war against Iran, the US fired 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles, a quarter of pre-war supplies, with reports that the Army tactical missile systems and precision strike missiles have been virtually used up since March, reducing its ability to launch highly targeted attacks. Richard Gaisford, Aljazeera, Washington.
Now, Richard mentioned this in his report, so let's take a closer look at just how many munitions the U.S. has used so far in this war with Iran. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the U.S. has used roughly 60% of its global Patriot missile stockpile. Now, Patriots have been one of the main ways that the Gulf states have defended themselves from Iranian drone attacks. There's another system, the THAAD, that's down to around half of pre-war levels. The THAAD is designed to hit faster and more destructive missiles than the Patriots. With us now to discuss this are Dan Grazier. He's a senior fellow and director of the National Security Reform Program at the Stimson Center, and Mark Cancian, a senior advisor with the aforementioned Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, and a former Pentagon official himself. Dan and Mark, thank you both so much for being back with me. Mark, I want to start with you. As Trump launched this war, and we're almost 6 months into it, was it not predictable that if it were to last this long, that it would lead to this extreme shortage of munitions?
If they had known it was going to last this long, absolutely. But remember, at the beginning of the war, they were talking about 4 to 5 weeks. If the war had ended at 4 to 5 weeks, the expenditures would have been high, but not nearly as high as they've been, and it would have taken much longer to rebuild the stockpiles.
There was a warning that was not public. It was reported by the Washington Post that Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, had said that we could end up in this situation, that it would mean a greater threat to the military and U.S. personnel across the region. Dan, do you agree? Was it simply a fact of that they thought that this war would just be over a lot sooner than it has been?
Well, I'm sure that was. A lot of times wars are often started with great optimism, but then the law of unintended consequences will assert itself, and these things will tend to drag out. I think an even bigger question is that all Americans should be asking right now is, with the explosion of defense spending over the last 25 years since September 11th, I think it's pretty ridiculous that that the U.S. military finds itself in this position, that after like 4 months of war, 4 or 5 months of war against a middle tier adversary, we're out of ammunition. Where did all of that money go over the last 25 years? That's a question that I think all of us really would like to have an answer to.
Well, certainly we've also been fairly generous with Ukraine over the past 4 years, and in defending Israel over the past several years since October 7th.
Correct, and we've been giving ammunition away. We've been using ammunition, in this war. But if we can't maintain the stocks with all of the money that has been appropriated to the services, to the Pentagon over the last 25 years, I think something in the whole process and the whole system has gone very wrong.
There was a rather remarkable piece of reporting from NBC News that said that American military commanders are allowing some Iranian missiles and drones to get through U.S. defenses simply because they can't afford to take them all down. Mark, how surprising is that to you?
It was actually not surprising, because that is a step that the military will take if it doesn't have enough munitions. What it will do is use the radars to see where a missile might land. And if it looks like it's going to land someplace that's maybe not going to cause a lot of damage, they'll let it through.
Before we go too much further, I want to drill down into some of the numbers to give our audience a better sense of what we are talking about when it comes to the cost to produce some of these munitions. So a single Patriot missile can cost as much as $4 million. THAAD missiles can cost up to $12 million each, and the radar that is necessary for the THAAD system can cost as much as $1 billion. Now, Iran was able to destroy one of those radar systems in Saudi Arabia at the start of the war. Just one Patriot missile costs 200 times more than an Iranian Shahed drone, and those Shahed drones can be made quickly and cheaply for as little as $20,000. So Trump administration officials have repeatedly insisted that there are no issues with the U.S. munitions stockpiles. Here's the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth.
We've got no shortage of munitions. Our stockpiles of defensive and offensive weapons allow us to sustain this campaign as long as we need to. I take issue with the characterization that munitions are depleted in a public forum. That's not true. And ultimately, we have all the munitions needed to execute what we need to execute, and we're going to ensure that we supercharge that going into the future.
There is a crisis with those stockpiles right now in private industry.
That is a manufactured story that the media wants to peddle. And ultimately, our stockpiles are great, and they'll only get stronger.
Mark, do you think Hegseth is trying to split hairs there, saying essentially there are enough munitions for this conflict, but avoiding the question of what could come down the line?
I think there were two things here, and that's one of them. That is that the United States, even if it's used half of these critical munitions, still has half left, and that would sustain a war against Iran for a substantial amount of time. But what the military is worried about is another war, particularly a war in the Western Pacific against China. Going into this war, it was believed that the inventories were insufficient for that war, and now, of course, they're even lower. The other thing is that the United States does have enough munitions in a couple of categories. For example, short range and medium range ground attack missiles and bombs. We have a large number of those, but it's on the longer range ones and the missile defense munitions where we're critically short.
Have you seen anything, Dan, in the way that Central Command, which is the command that is carrying out this war for the U.S., the way that they are acting, the things that they're doing or not doing that would indicate that they are adapting to this shortfall?
I can't really say that I have. The operational strategy at play here seems to hold firm. The Central Command is largely sticking to an air power campaign, just by dropping bombs and firing missiles. That seems to be the military strategy that's in place here. The only thing that I've seen is that with the depleted stockpiles, it seems like we have the United States has less of an ability to continue carrying on these strikes. And so now we're starting to see more diplomatic efforts to try to end the war, which is a hopeful sign, actually. I mean, I wish it wasn't from, I hate to characterize it like this, but a position of weakness, because we can't continue carrying on the same level of effort as we had before. But a negotiated settlement is the best course of action at this point.
Yeah, one example I was thinking of was as the ceasefire fell apart and the president said that he was going to ramp up military action, that only lasted for a couple days before it subsided again. And there was some reporting again around that it could be due to this shortage. Now, one person who appears to be contradicting all of this is the Deputy Secretary of Defense. His name is Steve Feinberg. And he indicated that this is indeed an urgent problem. The Washington Post reported over the weekend that last week there was a memo that Feinberg sent to industry leaders. This was last Wednesday, telling them that they had until the end of this month to come up with proposals to speed up weapons manufacturing. He warned that, quote, years-long development cycles are not acceptable. We must dramatically accelerate our program schedules and expand our production capacity now. Mark, that seems far easier said than done.
Well, it is difficult. Officials in the Pentagon have been saying things like this for decades because the system is slow. We've seen the president bring in senior executives from defense industry. Secretary Hegseth has done the same thing. Now, Deputy Secretary Feinberg has put out this memo. They are trying to accelerate the process, and to its credit, the Trump administration has put a lot of money against this problem. The thing is, it just takes time. It takes years to increase production rates to the levels that we're trying to aim for. To give a sense of that, before the Ukraine war, we were building about 300 Patriots a year. Now it's up to about 600, split half between us and our allies and partners. We want to get up to 2,000 a year, but it's going to take until at least 2030.
But we have seen Secretary Hegseth recently go back to Capitol Hill to ask for more money. This time it was $67.5 billion to help with the campaign, but just through September. Dan, it does not appear that much progress has been made on that front. We now have Congress in recess. They have not approved that additional spending.
Well, that's very true, but I don't believe that we can, that it's just a lack of money causing this problem. Because again, the American people have been spending more and more on defense since September 11th than we have at any other time in our history other than like World War II. And every year we have these dire warnings about how we need to increase the capacity for the defense industrial base. And every year Congress appropriates more money for it. And yet we see diminished capacity. So this isn't really a problem that we can spend our way out of. A main culprit of this, when we're talking about $4 million for a Patriot and $12 million for a THAAD missile, what we're talking about is a problem of exquisiteness. We need to design simpler weapons that can be bought at scale and produced in a relevant time span. And that's just not what we have right now because we have a bias for exquisite technology.
Mark, on that, how much do you think the Pentagon will diversify what's being invested in? If it gets this money, does it go back into the same programs or is it going to be spread out in a different way?
I think the Pentagon now has enough money that they can do both, and that's what they're proposing to do. In other words, there's a lot of money going into the traditional programs like Patriot, like THAAD, like Tomahawk, but they're also investing in new systems. We've seen some drones, for example, like the Shaheds. In fact, a copy of the Shaheds. There's talk about developing a low-cost Patriot. We've seen medium-range cruise missiles. A lot of that is in development. I think over time what you're going to see is a spectrum of capabilities. You will have that very high end, but you're also going to have a medium and a low end.
So, of course, the United States has fought a number of wars in the past century. Stockpile issues are nothing new. So how has the U.S. handled those stockpile issues in the past? Aljazeera's Eva McKent has this report.
When the United States entered World War I in 1917, it did not have the massive military program we know today. The government had to quickly expand production to make more weapons and ammunition needed for war. By 1945, after World War II ended, the United States had 86 ammunition plants. The nation produced around 41 billion rounds of ammunition during the war. By 1950, the military still had more than 7 million tons of World War II ammunition sitting in its stockpiles. Having too much ammunition can eventually become a problem too. It costs money to store. The equipment gets old. But just 5 years after the end of World War II, the Korean War began, and the stockpile was needed. When U.S. forces entered the war, some American units had only about a 45-day supply of ammunition. As the fighting intensified, ammunition shortages became serious enough that some supplies had to be rationed. Some orders took 18 to 24 months to reach the battlefield. You can draw down a stockpile much faster than you can replenish it. Let's fast forward to after the Cold War. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the United States no longer expected to fight a massive, prolonged war. So the military reduced purchases, factories closed, production capacity shrank. At one point, the number of government-owned plants making small and medium-caliber ammunition had fallen to less than half of what existed during the Cold War. And that brings us to today. It's not simply how many missiles does America have. It's a question of how quickly can America make missiles when it needs them. Eva McKend, Al Jazeera, Washington.
On that point, if the war with Iran were to end today and the U.S. could focus on replenishing and diversifying its stockpiles, Mark, how long do you think it would take the U.S. to get back to what you would consider an adequate or safe level?
Well, it would take 1 to 5 years, depending on the munition, to get back to where we were pre-war. And most experts and war planners believe that that was not adequate for a potential war in the Western Pacific. So it would take another several years after that to get the levels that would make the war planners more comfortable. But what this points out is the need for a sustained commitment. If the United States does the kind of surge and then drawdown that it's done in the past, as we just heard, then we'll be back in the same situation in the future. We need to build the inventories, and then we need to maintain the ability to surge, which in peacetime is often regarded as wasteful because you're keeping production facilities going that aren't needed for peacetime production.
There are two major assumptions when it comes to America's main adversaries: that Putin at some point will make some sort of effort, attack a NATO ally somewhere in Eastern Europe. And then, of course, there's an assumption that at some point China will go for Taiwan. Dan, to what extent do you think Russia and China now, because of this war in Iran, because of where the stockpiles, see an especially strong strategic opening?
Well, I mean, those are the assumptions. I have my doubts about both of those scenarios, though. But this is going to be a good test to see what our potential adversaries might actually do. I wrote a whole report last year about all the reasons why I don't believe China is likely to invade Taiwan. It's just like simply too risky for them. I believe the Chinese leaders when they say they want to regain full political control of Taiwan, but I just don't think they're going to use the military means, to do that. And this is a really good test. If the Chinese believe that the United States does not have adequate stockpiles to be able to sustain a campaign against them, then this might be the time that the Chinese leaders might try to attempt something like that. If they don't, I think that kind of gives us our real answer about what China's actual intentions are with regards to Taiwan.
The flip side, of course, is a lot of allies rely on the United States for their weaponry. Ukraine is the easiest example, but there are a number of others that receive and buy weapons from the United States. So who are the allies who are most affected by this American shortage?
Well, keep in mind that many of our allies do use our weapons. There are 18 countries that use Patriot, for example. And the United States, and particularly the Trump administration, has been encouraging countries to buy American. But now that some of these munitions are short, there's going to be a political process deciding who gets the output. The Pentagon, for example, with Patriot, wants to retain those new production missiles for itself. Ukraine wants them. And many other countries, the Gulf countries, have used much of their inventory. Same thing with Tomahawk. The Japanese have purchased 400. They've configured a ship to use them. But they're now being told they're going back in the line because the United States needs those.
The U.S. literally says, sorry, guys, we're skipping ahead in line?
Yes, absolutely. They've done that with Japan. They did it with Switzerland, which was trying to buy Patriots. Switzerland was very, very angry.
Dan, are we seeing some of these countries, some of these allies ramping up their own production, looking elsewhere because they can't get this kind of weaponry from the U.S.?
We have. We've heard numerous countries, particularly in Europe, that are starting to look towards like ramping up their own industrial base because the United States doesn't seem like as reliable a partner. Another good example of that, this isn't just in regards to the kind of weapons that they're buying, but the recent pact that was signed between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey. But I think this is a problem not just based in on the situation with Iran. I think this is kind of a culmination of a number of factors. Think about all the countries that have been partners with the F-35 program. That program's been going on for 25 years. The jet continues to go up in price, but its capabilities continue to fall short. It doesn't surprise me that leaders of countries around the world are starting to question the security arrangements that they have with the United States, because I don't know that we've been the best partner for them, and so it's only prudent that they make that they look to making other arrangements.
Mark, how much of the issue do you think is because of who the Trump administration has chosen for some of these positions? Pete Hegseth, for example, he had served in uniform, but certainly not at the senior levels of the Defense Department. The Washington Post reported that when there was a cabinet meeting at Camp David, that Trump lashed out at Hegseth because he hadn't emphasized how urgent this issue was. Do you think if there was a more experienced and capable defense secretary that this would have been raised sooner, this would have been handled differently?
I think the big decision for this administration was the war, and going to war and assuming a short war, because that is what has produced the current crisis. To the administration's credit, they asked for money up front in the reconciliation bill. There was a lot of money for munitions. There's a lot of money in the 27 budget. That's a lot more than during the Biden administration, which also started this ramp up and started to put money towards the problem. So I think that in terms of the budget, I think they did what they could. The problem was starting the war.
To your point, this was a war of choice. This was not a war that necessarily had to happen. And Dan, I think there are a lot of progressives who might argue that with lower stockpiles, maybe the U.S. wouldn't embark on wars of choice like this. They might feel a little bit more vulnerable. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that myth has been exploded by what we've seen just this year so far. This has been a pretty active military year. I will point out that a lot of these problems they're coming to a head now, but these problems have been building for a very long time. And we can point the fingers at the people in charge right now. And to your point about having a more experienced Secretary of Defense, we've had 8 Secretaries of Defense this century before Pete Hegseth, and all of them have contributed to this problem. Leading in the years leading up to this. And so again, these are the result of really long-term systemic problems. And until officials here in Washington really contend with a lot of the pathologies that lead to these ineffective policies, we're not really going to solve any of these problems.
And it really does appear that things are coming to a head, and that this is really going to influence the course of the war and the diplomatic conversations that will follow. Dan Grazier from the Stimson Center, Mark Cancian from CSIS, thank you both very much. And that's all from me and the team here in Washington. Heading back to Richard Gaisford and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha.
Thanks, Alex. That's it for this edition of This is America. You can watch us each weekday at 18:30 GMT. That's 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. Or catch up with any of our programs on YouTube. For now, though, from the Pentagon, it's goodbye.